Hey guys. About a year ago, I talked to some ex-Mizzou professors and casually mentioned the decline in enrollment. I said something to the effect of, it must be because of the Black Lives Matter protests, which I thought was fairly obvious. But to my surprise, one of them responded, no, it's because they can't pay all of the administrators that they need. I really wanted to laugh because Mizzou has far too many administrators that are paid way too much. And of course, this decline is due to Marxism more or less controlling all aspects of modern academia. So their reaction was just perfect, tidy evidence of this smug, professorial solipsism that has permeated campuses and destroyed academia. As you all know, I went to Mizzou, and generally, although I've talked about liberalism in the English curriculum and Keynesian theory touted in the economics department, I did not receive the same thorough indoctrination into Marxism that kids about 5 years behind me did. But it certainly did creep in there, and by the time I had graduated, the writing was on the wall. I knew that pretty quickly people would start getting out of college and not getting jobs because they went to Mizzou. Employers would know that it's a particularly bad indoctrination center and that if hired, they'll be dealing with snowflake employees that did not receive the requisite life skill to be successful, and likely will be making baseless claims of racism and sexism at their new jobs. Eventually, students would stop applying since it's also expensive and now literally has a negative return on investment. So it should be a surprise to no one that freshman enrollment at Mizzou has fallen by more than 35% in the 2 years since the protests. Earlier this week, the New York Times published an article called Long After Protests, Students Shun the University of Missouri, and it is just as biased as you would expect. The author starts by characterizing the protesters as brave revolutionaries. Students complaining of official inaction in the face of racial bigotry joined forces with a graduate student on a hunger strike, who we later discovered is the spoiled, entitled son of a railroad executive millionaire, by the way. Within weeks, with the aid of the football team, they had forced the university system president and the campus chancellor to resign. It was a moment of triumph for the protesting students, but it has been a disaster for the university. Now, with budget cuts due to lost tuition and a decline in state funding, the university is temporarily closing 7 dormitories and cutting more than 400 positions, including those of some non-tenured faculty members, through layoffs and by leaving open jobs unfilled. Few areas have been spared, the library is even begging for books. The protests inspired movements at other colleges. Since then, fights over overt and subconscious racial slights, as well as battles over free speech, have broken out at Middlebury, Berkeley, and Evergreen State College. Missouri's experience shows how a conflict, if not deftly handled, can stain a college's reputation long after the conflict has died down. I like that last line. Mizzou shows how a conflict, if not deftly handled, can stain a college's reputation. The author completely blames the handling of the conflict, not the origin of the conflict itself, probably because said events were obviously hoaxes. Remember that the incidents that caused the football team to strong-arm the president's resignation by starting a strike and that ignited Black Lives Matter was a false reporting of a KKK sighting, which was retracted and admitted to be a hoax by the man that reported it, and the infamous poop swastika of which there is literally no evidence. I lived in Columbia for 4 years, and while I was at Mizzou, I never witnessed one single incident, not one, of white-on-black racism. These students made Mizzou out to be the land of deliverance-style redneck racists, which was never the case. It was always liberal and irritatingly tolerant. And despite the baseless claims, they were able to force these weak administrators out because they're afflicted with terminal white guilt. Mizzou did have a poor response, and that the New York Times is accidentally correct. But where the school erred was in capitulating at all for fear of financial losses resulting from the football team's strike. There should have been expulsions and a complete unwillingness to budge an inch. No apologies, no resignations, no diversity initiative, nothing. Mizzou would be in a much, much better long-term financial situation had they done this, even if there were immediate, severe financial consequences because of the football strike, which never would have lasted anyway. Most of the football team is only at Mizzou because of their athletic contribution, and I bet big money that if they were told that a strike would violate the terms of their admission, that they would lose their scholarships, and that they would promptly and unapologetically be replaced, they would have fallen in line pretty quickly. Not to mention that students from other states would see that University of Missouri is not tolerating social justice bullshit, and in light of the worthless educations that most colleges now offer, such an attitude would have a broad appeal. I bet their enrollment would have gone way up this year if they had just refused to acquiesce. Instead, they went completely off the rails, and during the notorious Melissa Click incident where a journalism professor threatened a student cameraman with mob violence when he tried to cover the ongoing protests, the university not only allowed administrators to contribute to the protests, but obliged the ridiculous demands of entitled protesters. This is from the Daily Caller. Emails from the University of Missouri's computer network obtained by Heat Street show that the activists who led the protest demanded generators and a fire pit to keep themselves warm and cozy as they camped out in tents on the campus quad during chilly November nights. School officials helpfully provided additional electricity. I encourage you to read the list of demands, which I've linked below. They are incredibly racist and ludicrous, and obliging any one of them, let alone almost all of them, obviously would result in the financial ruin of the university. The demands include not just the resignation of the president, but the creation of racial awareness and inclusion curriculum in every department, an increase in Black faculty to 10%, an increase in retention rates for Blacks, by which they mean that fewer Black students should drop out, so they probably need to make the curriculum easier for them, more funding for mental health professionals to be used by people of color, and last but not least, increases in funding, resources, and personnel for the social justice centers on campus. This list of demands bulks up already bloated departments and creates new, even more useless departments. It eliminates meritocracy in both the pool of professors and in the student body. All around, it makes the quality of students and teachers worse while drastically increasing expenses. Brilliant work. Now back to the New York Times article. The first thing the author does in discussing the decline in enrollment is to launch off a completely superfluous racial breakdown. Students of all races have shunned Missouri, but the drop in freshman enrollment last fall was strikingly higher among Blacks at 42% than among whites at 21%. A racial breakdown was not yet available for this fall's freshman class. The author then takes this opportunity to launch into an anecdote about a Black student in the journalism school. She understands why Black students might not apply to a campus where they are all but invisible. A friend's boyfriend obliviously told her that she looked like Aunt Jemima, and she was dismayed that her friend did not object. Being the other in every classroom and every situation is exhausting, she said. The other, all but invisible? Black Mizzou students have been in the media so much over the last few years, and for a long time, people were listening to them. This is a ridiculous claim. And is one racist joke supposed to convince me that there is a pattern of making students feel like the other at Mizzou? Administrators bent over backwards to accommodate the nearly completely Black football team in 1950 protesters. The author then has to point out that this decrease in Black enrollees is basically insignificant in the context of the larger numbers, but no need to let that get in the way of your stupid anecdote. By sheer numbers, the drop in white students has caused the greatest damage since they make up a majority of those on campus. Tyler Morris, a white student from St. Louis, said he was afraid of being stereotyped as a bigot if he went to Missouri, so he decided to go to Missouri Valley College just down the road. The discrimination wasn't against white people, but I didn't want to be that person who I guess was stereotyped because I was white, he said. He's clearly walking on eggshells. He damn well knows that there is discrimination against white people there and that he will get called a bigot, but he can't say it, so he dances around it. Now that she's finally addressed the white issue, the author thinks it's about time in the article to move on to anti-Semitism. Allie Zuhler's mother and cousins went to Missouri, and her mother would have liked for her to go there as well, she said. But Miss Zuhler, who is Jewish and grew up in suburban St. Louis, said she could not stomach going to a place where Blacks and Jews might feel unwelcome. When she heard that a swastika had been smeared in feces on a dormitory bathroom in Missouri, she decided not to apply. She enrolled instead at Truman State, where she will be a sophomore this coming year. Looking for colleges is intimidating just by itself, she said. Adding anti-Semitism on top of that was just too much. I had tons of Jewish professors, there were tons of Jewish administrators, and I also never saw any instances of anti-Semitism on campus. Not one in the 4 years that I was there. This poop swastika story was completely fabricated, and it is so ridiculous, with no evidence ever presented, that I have a hard time believing that anyone took it seriously. The author then jams something in here about Ferguson in order to segue to the next completely invented incident of racism on Mizzou's campus. Ferguson, just a 2-hour drive away, was still a fresh memory in September 2015 when Peyton Head, the Student Association president, posted on Facebook that people riding in the back of a pickup truck had continuously screamed racial slurs at him. The post went viral and the outcry escalated through what has become known in the protest world as intersectionality, grievances that gain potency by being bundled together. There were demonstrations against racism and to support Planned Parenthood, which was under attack by state lawmakers. If you remember, lying liar Peyton Head, the student body president at University of Missouri, that claims that racial slurs were hurled at him by Whitey from the back of a pickup truck, also invented these KKK claims and has since admitted that he fabricated the claims because he was, quote, in a state of alarm. But don't let that get in the way of your narrative either, New York Times. Finally, after word vomiting every defensive story that could lay the groundwork for sympathy for these idiot protesters and administrators, the author says something true. In the minds of many, her outbursts and the resignations became symbols of a hair-trigger protest culture lacking any adult control. Yes, there we go. The university received a barrage of emails from alumni and families, some of which were published by National Review and Heat Street, a conservative news site. In one, the parents of a junior wrote that while they did not underestimate the extent of bigotry in the world, the way to effect change is not by resorting to the type of mob rule that's become apparent over the past few days. What on earth did Mizzou expect? Missouri has a ton of white middle-class people that don't want to be called racist all the time because they aren't. They just want to go to college, learn something valuable, get a degree, and get a job like a normal person. Your average middle-class white Missourian, liberal or conservative, no longer can do this. They will go to college, get into debt, not only learn nothing of value, but will almost invariably adopt an incredibly destructive worldview and will not be employable for one or many reasons. While freshman enrollment has plummeted, students already at Missouri have not transferred out in large numbers. A sign administrator said that the protests looked worse from the outside. Christian Bossi, a spokesman, said the university was formulating a marketing campaign to correct what he called misperceptions about the extent of the unrest. Missouri has also appointed a chief diversity officer, promised to double the percentage of minority faculty members by 2020, and recruit more minority postdoctoral fellows, and is requiring diversity training for faculty and staff members and incoming students. How incredibly stupid. Have they learned nothing? First, it doesn't matter if students aren't transferring out. That just helps you kick the can down the road. If enrollment is way down and there's no reason to think that it will improve because you're giving in to ridiculous demands left, right, and sideways, you are completely screwed. It isn't the misperception of the incident that is causing these problems. It is the clear perception that a spineless administration placated a mob, and the result is that they no longer offer a tangible education. And spending money on a diversity officer and initiative at a critical time in the college's history, not to mention a financially precarious one, is so misguided that it leads me to believe that things are going to get much worse for Mizzou before they get better. They're going to eliminate any remaining meritocracy that exists for administrators by increasing the number of mandated minority professors, who will certainly have a racial agenda, perpetuating the underlying problem. They clearly have not accurately assessed the source of the enrollment drop. They're still trying to make it about white-on-black racism, but their attitude that demands that this racism exist where it does not is really the culprit that has completely destroyed the school's reputation. The author closes out with a hopeful but misguided quote from a staff member. I think we squandered a rare opportunity that we had to be a local, regional, national, global leader in terms of showing how a university can deal with its problems, including related to race relations, Berkeley Hudson, a journalism professor, said. The protest could have been turned into an asset, a chance to celebrate diversity. We still can, he said. Once again, I agree with this, but for different reasons. Yes, a rare opportunity was squandered to show people how you deal with race baiting, intimidation, a feral student body, an insubordinate football team, and a completely retarded administration. You kick off every football player that engaged in the strike. They are violating the terms of their scholarship by refusing to play. Mizzou should have done this and sat out the season if they had to. They would have been better off in the long term financially, even if they immediately lost tons of money. There are probably thousands of high schoolers or transfers with talent that are dying to play Mizzou football, and if these students are refusing to play despite it being the primary, if not only reason that they were admitted, expel them immediately and replace them. Professors like Melissa Click needed to be fired for obvious reasons, and it wouldn't be without cause. Any professor touting social justice should have been eliminated, as should have about half of Mizzou administrators. There are literally thousands of pointless positions and disciplines that were completely invented by academics and perpetuated by feminists anyway. Entire departments at Mizzou need to be shut down. There are 13,000 professors, administrators, and other employees with a student body of around 30,000. Luckily, mass firings and facility shutdowns are in full swing. 400 jobs have been cut, and tuition has been raised to fill the gaps in the $16.6 million drop in revenue that the school faces because of falling enrollment, in addition to the $14.7 million state budget cut. This is a pretty good start, but they need to get the administration size down to just a few thousand, maybe less. And that isn't going to happen just by not renewing contracts and letting people retire. It also isn't going to happen if they continue to hire based on diversity, which which they have stated that they will comply to protesters' demands and hire black professors over white ones. There are entire divisions and departments that need to be completely eliminated if Mizzou wants to stay afloat. They just have to cut the fat. They're either social justice warrior fields or completely obsolete. Women's and gender studies, peace studies, magazine journalism, inclusion, diversity, and equity, Black studies, and civil rights in Title IX. The only way that schools like Mizzou, Evergreen, and Berkeley will stay afloat is if they cut their curriculum and staff down to the bare bones. Only essential departments. And the journalism school, which is just producing more articulate and impactful social justice warriors, could also be slashed to basically nothing. Mizzou administrators think that by complying, they are going to improve their public image, but they are misguided. No one actually thinks that they're racist. Until they see that people aren't going there because of the poor quality of education that they now offer, and because of the administration and curriculum bloat, and because they are kowtowing to a bunch of 20-year-old racists, there will be no improvement in their financial situation. I look forward to many more dorm closings, thousands of firings and resignations, and hopefully a complete and thorough destruction of the entire university. They sure did earn it. Thanks for watching, and I'll be interviewing Dave Cullen, Computing Forever, on my podcast Beauty in the Beta tomorrow at 6 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. And then I'll see you again next Friday for a new video. Thanks. See you soon.